Oh, what am I? Where's my? Give me a second, please.
And happy Father's Day, everyone.
All right. Everyone can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Let us pray. Lord, I ask that as we intentionally draw near to you these next few moments, that you will draw near to us and speak to our hearts in a fresh new way as we study your word. Amen.
Amen.
All right, now today we're going to look at the Simons of the Bible. The first thing I should say to you, when I was looking through them and I came across about 11 Simons, and they're all either in the New Testament or what we will call the intertestamental period. Now, for those who might want to know what is the intertestamental period, those of you who have Bibles that have the Apocrypha onto them, sometimes the Apocrypha may come between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Some Bibles have the Apocrypha come in after the New Testament. Really and truly, Apocrypha should come between the Old and the New Testament. It is that is the period. So the books of the Apocrypha are the books of the intertestamental period. They are books before Christ, and so they come after the Old Testament and before the New Testament. So we have two.
Okay.
Say that.
I couldn't find them in mine, so I was going to ask.
Because you probably don't. Do you have an Apocrypha book? You probably does. Your Bible probably doesn't have the Apocrypha.
I don't have it either. So
okay.
Yes.
Well, that was going to be a question. What? Okay.
Yes. So you will find the first two that I gave you, which was Simon in Sirach, and the other Simon who is from the first book of Maccabees. Those books, those two Simons are in the Apocrypha books, are in the what you call the intertestamental period. Then the others are in the New Testament. But we are only going to focus mainly. We're going to focus on. I mean, there's only one major Simon, which is Simon Peter. That's the major Simon. We'll look at him last. The others, there's not a whole lot. A couple of them I left out. Like I left out one. If you want to write this text down, from John chapter 6 and verse 71. I think it's John chapter 6 and verse 71, where there's a Simon who is the father of Judas Iscariot. So Judas Iscariot's father was a man named Simon Iscariot. But it just mentions him as the father. Let me make sure I'm correct in giving you the right text, because I don't want to give you the wrong text so you can't find it. Let's see, John chapter 6. Let's see, John chapter 6 and verse 71. Right, yes. He meant Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, who, though one of the 12, was later to betray him. So you see in John chapter 6 verse 71, there's Simon Iscariot. There's another one. Oh, in Matthew chapter 13 and verse 55. And Matthew chapter 13 and verse 55 only mentions Simon as a brother of Jesus. Just like how it says James is a brother of Jesus, Simon is also mentioned as a brother of Jesus in Matthew chapter 13 and verse 55. Now let's go through the other ones. We see there's the first one is Simon the high priest, who is also called Simon the Just, and he is considered in Sirach chapter 50 and verse 1. For those who could not find it, let me find Sirach for you quickly and read that verse to you.
Chapter what?
50, Sirach chapter 50.
I could read it, Father.
You got it? Read it for me, please.
The greatest among his brethren, the glory of his people, was Simon the priest, son of Johachanan, in whose time the house of God was renovated, in whose days the temple was reinforced.
Good.
I keep going if you want, but
yeah. I mean, yeah. I'm looking. I cannot. Hold 1 second.
Magnificent robes and wearing the garments of splendor.
Let's go here. Right. Sirach 50. There we go. I was looking into a Bible, but then realized I wasn't seeing the Apocrypha in that Bible. So let's see a minute. Continue reading till I stop you, George. Thank you.
in his time also the wall was built with powerful turrets for the temple precincts. In his time the reservoir was dug, the pool with a vastness like the sea. He protected his people against brigands and strengthened his city against the enemy. How splendid he was as he appeared from the tent, as he came from within the veil, like a star shining among the clouds, like the full moon at the holy day season, like the sun shining upon the temple, like the rainbow appearing in the cloudy sky, like the blossoms on the branches in springtime, like a lily on the banks of the stream, like the trees of Lebanon in summer, like the fire of incense at the sacrifice, like a vessel of beaten gold studded with precious stones, like a luxuriant olive tree thick with fruit, like a cypress standing against the clouds.
Thank you. Thank you. So all of that, as you read through, it tells you how he was, what kind of person he was. And if anything, I would send you all a link to an online Bible that has the book of the Apocrypha in it, so you can see it and read it. But that was Simon the high priest, and the first verse talks about him being in his life he repaired the house of the Lord, and in his time he fortified the temple. And then it tells you a whole lot of stuff that he was like and what he did. Yes, Susan.
What does intertestamental mean?
Intertestamental is just a period between the Old and New Testament. It is a period. We often think that the Old Testament and after the Old Testament came straight the New Testament. No, there was a period in there. That's why, like it is the inter. I think Pam put the link for Sirach for you already. I just saw it. Thank you, Pam.
Thanks. So people were writing.
The Intertestament, but the Apocryphal books come between there. So this Simon we are talking about, who was the high priest, he existed around let me see, what I should say early, because you see when you're counting in BC goes down, but he would have existed around 300 to 270 BC.
Who wrote these?
These are books that were written by these people that you see their names, some of them, but they were not placed in the canon as we have it as the Old and New Testament. So for example, if you go to a Baptist church, they will not have a Bible that have the Apocrypha in it. If you go to the Roman church, they will have the Apocrypha in it. It is just a set of books. I like to call them the second batch of books. So you got the Old and the New Testament, which is the first batch, and you got these as the Apocrypha books, which is like a second batch. And then there are some books at all that did not make the canon at all, that have not been placed in the, when I say the canon, in the Bible as it is, as we have it.
They weren't
Okay.
written by disciples or
Some of the oh gosh, I don't remember them all, but man, yes, they will be written by disciples. If you're talking about the 12 apostles, no, but they have some like one last Wednesday at Mass, or Wednesday Mass, we read part of a book called Bell and the Dragon, which also is part of Daniel, which is like a continuation of the book of Daniel. It speaks of Daniel in that book and things that he does.
That's also in the Apocryphal Bible as well too, Bell and the Dragon.
Right, Bell and the Dragon is an apocryphal book. You have like the book of Judith. If you've heard Judith, the biblical name Judith, there's a book of Judith in the Apocrypha books.
okay.
But
I
it
There's
never,
is
also a book of Susanna.
yeah. Hold on a minute, Bryce. Go ahead. What you're saying, Susan?
well, I've never, in all my Episcopal days, I've never heard of that part of the Bible.
Yeah,
So
we do
kinda
it.
like-
We don't use it as much. We don't use it as much as the Roman Church does, but we do use books like, if you have ever heard of the book Ecclesiasticus. This is to differentiate from Ecclesiastes. There's Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament. There's Ecclesiasticus, which is in the book of the Apocrypha. We have
Okay.
used, we in the Episcopal Church have used that. We use another book called the Book of Tobit. There's a verse in there that we use, the chapter in there, and a few verses in there that we use a lot at, some people use a lot at weddings. It's in there, the Book of
Okay.
Tobit.
Thanks.
Ecclesiasticus, if you were to go and read Ecclesiasticus, which is in the Apocrypha, chapter 44, it talks about praising famous men or honorable men. That's a book sometimes that is used at funerals for people who were famous or who did a lot of things that was quite known. We have used.
Thanks. I don't want to get off track. I'll have to go in and look
Yeah,
at
go and look for it. We do
I
have
have a
it.
question.
Yes, Linda.
Who is Sirach? What does that mean? Is that the book Sirach?
That it is a book of
Is
Sirach.
that a person?
Actually, the book of Sirach, and it's good to you say that, because this book of Sirach is the book of Ecclesiasticus. That is another name
Oh,
for it.
okay.
Sirach, and it's sometimes called, I think, the wisdom of Jesus or something like that as well. I think sometimes it carries that name.
Oh,
So
wow.
this actually, the book of Sirach is the book of Ecclesiasticus, and thing. So yes.
Okay, well,
That
we went
it
to the
is.
same
It is.
church, so.
Hmm?
I said, Linda and I went to the same church. We knew nothing about this part. So,
Ah,
okay.
but the name Sirach, in this case is most likely, it is usually seen that this is the person who wrote the book. Sirach
Okay.
is the person who
Thank you.
wrote the book.
Okay.
Yes.
You know. Thank you.
Yes. But no, go and look up. You want to say something, Marilyn?
I was just going to read out of the book of Sirach from the beginning as a introduction to it. It says the book of Sirach derives its name from the author, Jesus, son of Eleazar, son of Sirach.
Mhm.
Its earliest title seems to have been, quote, Wisdom of the Son of Sirach, unquote.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, but go and if anything, or when you go on or go on your computer and just Google the Apocrypha online.
First written in Hebrew.
Yeah,
And
thanks.
if you find if you got that, Pam, put it in and just copy it out of the. Y'all know how to go into chat, which Pam is putting it into, right? She just put Sirach. Let me see.
Yeah, well, I have the Apocryphal Bible.
Right.
Father
Pam,
Tony.
you're muted.
I put Sirach in. I also put the Wikipedia that describes what the Apocrypha is.
Okay, all of that is there. If you all go into chat in where Pam has put that, you will see all of that there. And you just
Father, I have it.
just copy and paste it, and then you can look at it at any time.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
But I
surprise.
know I did not know that you didn't know that.
No, I said,
That's-
Yeah, I have the Apocryphal Bible.
Yeah, yeah,
Father
yeah.
Tony.
all right.
Oh,
Thank
okay,
you.
Bryce. Yeah. But as I
So I don't
said,
have
it
to
is
worry
not,
about
as I said, it's not used a whole lot in the Episcopal Church.
No,
but
no,
it
I
is
don't use
used,
it
it is
ever.
it is used
Even when I do my readings, I
at
don't ever use
times.
it ever.
But like if you went to the Baptist church or some Pentecostal church, they will not use it at all. But I know like in the Roman church, they have a Bible called the Jerusalem Bible, and it is built in there. It is in there. In fact, I
Okay.
think if my mind serves me correctly, and George can tell me if I'm right or wrong, it is where it should be, which is in the middle between the two books, the Old and the New Testament.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's at
in
the end
King
of the Old
James.
Testament,
Yeah.
and it's
before the
in
New
my
Testament.
Bible, which is a St. Joseph edition of the New American Bible.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, I will tell you this: there's a lot of good stuff. If you read the Apocryphal books, there's a lot of good stuff there. A lot of good
Oh
stuff.
yeah, there is. There's a lot of good stuff in there. I like reading it a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
All right. So let's
Okay.
continue now.
Continue.
So this Simon is said to have died around 270 BC, but there's also some scholars who also refer because this Simon also had a grandson named Simon as well, who also was a high priest in the year 210 to 196 BC, and so some scholars, there's still a bit of uncertainty if this Simon is the grandfather or the grandson, but because both of them were named Simon and both of them were called Simon the Just. So, and this Simon was a member of the great synagogue who regulated Jewish life in the centuries following Ezra, and you know Ezra is in the Old Testament. And he's also known for he's also known because of certain traditions he set that they were still observed by those who were teachers of the law in the time of Jesus. So he set a good trend for people to follow. So you can go and read him in chapter 50 of Sirach. Then we have Simon the Maccabean, who I think I sent you the chapters, is Simon, or he was called Simon Maccabeus, and he's in the first book of Maccabees, and I think there are 3 Maccabean books, if my mind serves me
There's
correctly.
four.
Four, right, 4 Maccabean books. Thank you, Bryce. 4 Maccabean books, and this Simon was also believed to be called Simeon as well, and he was the 3rd son of the priest Mattathias, who led a Jewish revolt that succeeded in overthrowing the Syrian rule of Judea in the 2nd century before Christ. But this Simon was often overlooked, although he was pretty good in what he did. He's the older brother of Judas Maccabeus, and Jonathan, who was the youngest of the 3. And Simon restored religious practices that had been forbidden, and he also established nearly a century of independence under the Hashmonean dynasty. And when his father Mattathias was on his deathbed, he commended Simon for his wisdom, saying, always listen to him, he shall be your father. And that is recorded in First Maccabees chapter 2 and verse 65. However, however, the father did not designate the older son Simon to be the commander of the rebel army. He commanded the younger Judas Maccabeus, the one right after him, was to become the commander. So he was overlooked, and we don't know why he was overlooked, why he was passed over for military leadership, but he just was. And then when Judas was not the commander anymore, Jonathan succeeded Judas as the commander, overlooking Simon again, although he was the older brother. But by the time Jonathan also was not commander anymore, because, and incidentally, he got killed, Simon then became the commander, and Simon was the one who would perform admirably as the commander of the army. He took over, he forced negotiations, and even when Syria negated on his agreements, he tried to invade Judea, and Simon's army repulsed him. So there's a bit there in First Maccabees chapter 2 about this Simon, who was the Maccabean. This Simon would also become a high priest. First Maccabees chapter 14 tells us that. And the office of high priest was handed down to his descendants until a trustworthy prophet should arise. And so this Simon is very well respected. He also ruled for about 6 years before being challenged by Antiochus, and who made a final effort to restore, and he made a final effort to restore Syrian, who was trying to make a final effort to restore Syrian control of Judea, but Simon defiantly refused him, and also this Simon had 2 sons whose names were Judas and John, and they went into battle with the Syrians, and Antiochus, who was who challenged Simon's son-in-law Ptolemy, who was the governor of Jericho, to murder Simon and his sons during a visit, and he was able to murder Simon and the son named Judas, but John survived the attack and was able to take over the Judean government before Antiochus could invade the country. So Simon, the Maccabeans is a family that, if you read the books of the Maccabees, you can find that there was a whole lot of turmoil and a whole lot of kind of fighting going on as they try to gain control of their own territory from foreign control. So, but if you could read First Maccabees chapters 1 to 16, it will speak about Simon Maccabees, which will be good. So those are the 2 Simons that were in the book of the Apocrypha. And as I said, those were the ones who existed before the New Testament. Now you come to the Simons now that are in the New Testament. And you got Simon the Zealot, or sometimes he's called Simon the Canaanian. And all 4 New Testament references to this disciple. He was a disciple of Jesus, one of the inner 12, but he was identified as the Zealot. Luke calls him Simon, who was called the Zealot, or some might pronounce it Zelok. He is called the Zelok again in Acts chapter 1 and verse 13. But when it comes to Matthew and Mark's Gospels, he's called Simon the Canaanian. Now, the word Canaan here does not mean that he was a Canaanite, or it does not mean that he came from the city of Cana. It just simply means is an Aramaic word meaning zealous one. That he was seen as a zealous one, and there were a group in that time that were called. He was not the only zealot or zealot that there was. Um, it is meant to be a description of his own religious fervor. There were people in those days who were like a revolutionary group, who were opposed to Roman occupation in Palestine, and they were willing to oppose anyone who was foreign, a foreign entity, and they were willing to oppose them by force. And it wasn't necessarily that it wasn't that they were bad people. It was just that they did not want foreign occupation of their land, of their country, and they wanted to stamp out those who were seeking to be, or who were already in their country, like the Roman authority. So Simon was kind of, although he was one of the 12 disciples, people would have seen Simon as kind of like a revolutionary. But again, when you look at Jesus, Jesus could be seen as a revolutionary too. The Pharisees certainly thought he was. So you have that. So it was more or less like a zealot party or zealot party, whichever you pronounce it.
Yeah, but Jesus was killed by the Romans.
Yes. The other thing, let me see if there's anything else we can say about him. I don't think there's really a whole lot more to say about this particular Simon. I'm just looking to see. Yeah, I think that's enough about him. But he was a disciple. He wasn't one of the top tier where you hear him speaking or talking a lot, or like Philip, or like Peter or James and John. But he was a member of Jesus's 12. Then you got Simon the Pharisee. You see him recorded in Luke chapter 7. And he hosted a dinner for Jesus at his home, and a guest apparently came in, a woman, an uninvited guest apparently came into the dinner. She's referred to as a woman of the city, who was a sinner. The people feel obviously she was a prostitute, they felt. And she, and I know some people thought this might be Mary Magdalene, but there's no proof that this is Mary Magdalene. We don't think it is Mary Magdalene. But this particular woman wet Jesus's feet with her tears. She dried them with her hair. She kissed them. She anointed them. And when this woman was doing this to Jesus, Simon felt, and he just thought it. And I know sometimes we read things and we think that Simon said it, but he didn't say it. He thought it. He felt that Jesus was no true prophet, because if he was a true prophet, he would have known what sort of woman was ministering to him, what sort of woman that was wetting his feet with her tears and drying them with her hair and kissing them and anointing them and all of that. And Simon felt that, this Pharisee, he would have told the woman, well, not to do that. However, Jesus was able to read Simon's mind, and he told Simon about a man who forgave 2 debtors, and one who owed much and one who owed little. And he asked Simon which of the 2 should be more grateful, and Simon responded, the one, I suppose, to whom he forgave more. You read that in Luke chapter 7. And so, and Jesus gently rebukes him and points out to him the way he greeted Jesus into his home. And he says, you didn't greet me with no kiss, you didn't wash my feet, you didn't anoint me. But this woman's act of pious humility, and even though she might be a sinful woman, her sins will be forgiven, for she has loved much. And that is in Luke chapter 7 and verse 47. So you see all of this took place in the home of a man who was named Simon, and he was a Pharisee. Then we have Simon the leper, and we are on it. There are many scholars who believe that Simon the leper and Simon, well, that Simon the leper could have been Simon the Pharisee, but in the sense that Luke's gospel refer to Simon the Pharisee, where Matthew and Mark refer to Simon the leper, where a similar thing took place. I don't think they were the same, but not because the fact that they were just the same kind of event took place with this woman being present doesn't necessarily mean that they were the same persons, but I know some scholars wonder if they are, because the same Simon the leper, where there was a dinner being hosted, there was a woman there who also washed Jesus's feet in an act of humble devotion. But in this case, we are told that it took place in Bethany. And every time you think of Bethany, you always think of Mary and Martha and Lazarus, who were friends of Jesus. And when Jesus was always in Bethany, he will stop at their home. In the stories, I mean, John's gospel identified Mary of Bethany as the woman who anoints Jesus during the supper at her home, which she shared with Lazarus and Martha. But Matthew and Mark, however, record that Jesus was in the house of this man called Simon the leper. And again, the woman's name is unknown, who approached and anointed him. Some believe, could be, we're not sure. Some believe that this Simon could have been the father of Jesus's three close friends of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, although we don't know that for a fact. But the fact is, what we would know, the fact that if Jesus went to the home of a leper, he was cured of his leprosy. And therefore, the belief is that this person who is Simon the leper could have been the leper that Jesus healed in Matthew chapter 8 and verses 1-5. If you remember that story that Jesus healing the leper in Matthew's gospel, it is believed that he could have been that person that Jesus would have healed. So although they call him Simon the leper, he's more or less Simon the former leper, not necessarily Simon the leper, because he would not have had leprosy. As you know, lepers were outcasts, and they could not be around the rest of society in those days. So there you have him, Simon the leper, who was in Bethany. Then you have Simon of Cyrene. Some may say Cyrene, some may say Cyrene. And we know about him. He's only mentioned at the time of Jesus's on his way to crucifixion, where the Roman soldiers came upon this man from Cyrene. His name was Simon, and they compelled him to bear Jesus's cross. And you see that in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 27. It is said that I think in Matthew and in Mark and Luke's Gospels, that this Simon is said to have been coming in from the country. And so it was quite likely that he was a Jew coming to Jerusalem for the Feast of the Passover at the time when he was asked to bear his cross. Now, Mark's Gospel identifies this particular Simon as the father of Alexander and Rufus in Mark's Gospel, chapter 15. And the reason for mentioning the sons, is perhaps to indicate that they were well-known Christian converts at the time that the gospel was written. And you will find that if you read the letter to the Romans, Paul does mention about greeting Rufus, who is eminent in the Lord, and to greet his mother and mine. And obviously Paul saw Rufus's mother as a mother as well. So it shows that Paul was particularly close to both Alexander and Rufus. And as I said, Alexander and Rufus were the sons of Simon the Cyrene. Some believe that because sometimes, I don't know if you've ever realized that sometimes Simon of Cyrene, he's identified with Simeon called Niger, that perhaps it is believed that that Simon of Cyrene was possibly a black man because of the word Niger and his association with Simeon, who was called Niger as well, that he was he probably was a black person. So that is Simon of Cyrene.
Why did you say it was important that they mentioned the father? He was the father of Alexander and Rufus. Why did they mention that?
Because they believe, because it is believed that by the time that the gospel was written, the Gospel of Mark, because Mark is the only one who mentions that the two of them were well-known Christian converts at the time when the gospel was written. And I just went on to say, so much so that Paul mentions Rufus's name in the letter of Romans, sending greetings to him and sending greetings to his mother. And Paul refers to Rufus's mother as his mother as well, not his biological mother, but his spiritual mother. And it shows that there was a closeness between Paul and Alexander and Rufus.
And Mark says that Simon of Cyrene was their father.
Their father, correct. Mark's gospel refers to that in chapter 15. Correct. Then you have Simon the magician, or the sorcerer, a man who obviously practiced magic and the occult and had a large following in Samaria before he was converted by Philip the evangelist. Philip was a deacon and evangelist. And if you were to read the Acts of the Apostles, you would find that Luke, who's the writer of Acts, talks about his fame. He mentions in chapter 8 and verse 10, they all give heed to him from the least to the greatest, saying, this man is that power of God which is called the Great. However, when Philip brought the gospel to Samaria, many among Simon's followers, this Simon the magician, his followers were converted, and eventually Simon himself was converted. He was baptized, and he was baptized because he was impressed with the signs and great miracles that Philip did. Now, remember, this guy is a magician, so he liked all these kinds of signs and what he think is magic, and he probably felt that Philip was working a lot of magic, and he liked what he saw. And then comes Peter and John, the son of Zebedee. They also came to Samaria and to confer the gift of the Holy Spirit on the new believers by the laying on of hands. And Simon became even more impressed, so much so that he offered the disciples money and telling them that he want their power so that he could lay hands that many can receive the Holy Spirit too. And what happened was that Peter rebuked him, telling him that his money will perish with him because he thinks that he could obtain God's gift with money, but you can't do that. And so when Peter told him that the same Simon the magician, that he needed to repent, he begged for prayers that would ensure forgiveness for his blasphemy. So he recognized that. But there's nothing much more about him in the New Testament. There's nothing more about him in the New Testament. There's probably legends about him, but as far as biblically, that is what we know about Simon the magician. He occurs in Acts chapter 8. And then the last Simon we have before Simon Peter is Simon the Tanner, who is recorded in the Acts of the Apostles as well. He's called Simon the Tanner because the tanner was his occupation. He made a living as a tanner, dealing with leather and that kind of, making things out of leather and that kind of stuff. And Peter stayed at his house in Joppa, and most likely it is possible that he was viewed like an outcast in the Jewish society, which could explain, if you read Acts chapter 10 and verses 6 and following, you will see that his house was by the seaside, which means that it was outside of town, and it could mean that he was on the fringes of society. Even if he wasn't an outcast, although he could have been, he was on the fringes of society. He was not well beloved by society. However, you find that Peter seemed to have no qualms about staying at his house, which also shows us that Peter was embracing all persons into the faith wherever he was going with the gospel, and spreading the gospel. He was embracing people, and Simon the Tanner was one of them. The thing about Simon the Tanner, apart from Peter staying with him, is what happened to Peter when he was on top the rooftop of Simon's house. And that is what is even more important, where Peter had a vision, a dream of this whole sheet filled with all kinds of animals and reptiles and birds and so forth. And then he heard a voice telling him to Peter, kill and eat, which is recorded in Acts chapter 10. And when Peter objects on the grounds that they were unclean, there was a voice that came and said to him, what God has cleansed, you should not call unclean, or you should not call common. And many folks look at this verse as symbolic of the fact it goes back to the Old Testament, where you were not supposed to eat pig and all kinds of different animals and birds that were forbidden to be eaten. That here God is saying that that everything what he has created, call nothing of it unclean, you can eat anything. But a deeper meaning behind this passage is the whole notion that it was really showing too that God shows no partiality when it comes to humanity. That when it comes to humanity, every person is meant to worship him, to fear him, to do what is right, and it will be acceptable. And so it was not only about just food per se, but also in terms of how God sees everyone. And you will find that after that incident happened with Peter, he immediately went out to Caesarea, and he had his first Gentile convert, which was Cornelius, the Roman centurion, that would follow and become the first Gentile convert for Peter. So you have Simon the Tanner. Yes, Marilyn.
Just a comment about something that was said earlier this afternoon. Chapter 36, in Joppa, there was a disciple named Tabitha, which was translated Dorcas.
Yes, that we were talking about this evening, right? You see it there? Yes.
Yeah.
Dorcas, Tabitha.
When you said something, I was thinking that the story you were talking about was Tabitha, so I wasn't following.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. One's Greek and the other is Aramaic.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Tabitha and Dorcas. And what Marilyn was referring to is something we were talking about earlier when we were at after by VBS today, because we have a lady in our congregation, who's one of the volunteers at the VBS from Advent in Palm City, whose name is Dorcas. And so one of the other volunteers were saying they didn't know that Dorcas was a biblical name, and I was saying to them, yes, it is a biblical name. It's in the Bible in the New Testament. So thank you, Marilyn. Good find. Now we come to Petros, Simon Peter. first thing, oh, I forgot to mention to you all, the word Simon means he hears or hearing. Didn't remember to say that. That's what the name Simon means. Peter means rock, Petros. And you will find it's Petros is the Greek for rock. And if you know, Simon has a third name that is sometimes being called by, anybody remember that name? There's Peter, there's Simon, what's the next one? What's the next name Peter is often called by? Cephas. He's usually called Cephas, C-E-P-H-A-S.
Yeah.
And it's the Aramaic. If you're wondering where you found that name, look at John chapter 1 and verse 42, where he's called Cephas. And the word Cephas is the Aramaic word for rock as well. Whereas Petros is the Greek word for rock. So when we look at Peter, I mean, you have to give Peter his jacket. I mean, Peter exemplifies a human being. You can't say nothing else about Peter than he exemplifies how it is. Sometimes we fall, sometimes we rise, and you fall, and we rise, and we fall, and you rise. And Peter is very much like that. You would think of him as an unlikely candidate to lead a religious revolution, if you want to call Christianity a religious revolution. You would think he was an unlikely candidate to do so. But what you realize about him is that from the time Jesus called him as a disciple, his life changed dramatically. He was a fisherman, but his life changed dramatically. And he became not only the most prominent of the disciples, but he was also, you could say, he was the main spokesman of the disciples as well, and the main spokesman for the church. You remember in the Acts of the Apostles on the day of the Christian Pentecost, as opposed to the Jewish Pentecost, both happened on the day of the Jewish Pentecost, which became the Christian Pentecost. Who was the one who preached after the Holy Spirit came? Peter did. Peter was the one who had his sermon and he preached. And by the end of preaching his sermon, how many people were converted to Christianity?
3,000.
3,000, correct. Now it is possible that Simon's name was really Simeon, but it was shortened to Simon. He's referred to as Simon Bar-Jonah. I was looked to see where that was, but there's a part I think he's referred to as, I think Jesus refers to him as Simon Bar-Jonah, which is just the Aramaic for son of Jonah, or sometimes could also be translated son of John. He was born in Bethsaida, which was on the north coast of the Sea of Galilee. And the name of that town means really house of the fishermen. He and his brother, and the brother had been given a Greek name, Andrew, grew up in a fishing family, and that no doubt would have traded with both Jews and Greeks. And Peter most probably spoke Aramaic with a Galilean accent, as well as some Greek. and he probably just received a basic education because he was a fisherman. He probably had a basic education, and probably did not get any real scholarly training in the Torah either. And so it gives you the kind of impression what kind of man, or what kind of men, I should say, Jesus chose as his disciples to start the church. They were technically not very well educated. Now, by the time Peter met Jesus, he was married. We know that because Jesus healed his mother-in-law when she was ill. and he had moved some miles to the Galilean town of Capernaum. And if you ever have any opportunity to go to the Holy Land, you can see where the house, or what is believed to where the house is. It's now obviously more done like a, what I say, it's not a museum, but it is there in the area of Capernaum where there's Peter's house. He and Andrew went into partnership with James and John, the sons of Zebedee. Again, another fisherman business that they had. You remember when they were called, they left their father and they hired, and the servants in the boat left the business and went and followed Jesus. It is apparent that even before Peter and Andrew encountered Jesus, that they also had messianic expectations. They were looking for the Messiah to come. They had exposure to John the Baptist, or John the Baptizer, as I like to call him, who was preaching about coming judgment and calling Israel to repentance. So it appears that they would have known about him. It is also possible that they were baptized by John and were kind of like disciples of him, learning his teaching. But obviously they were not with John as they were with Jesus. They didn't leave their business when they were John, but they obviously left their business when they were with Jesus. And the way that Peter began to follow Jesus is we know that it's described in a couple of ways. John's gospel shows that Andrew is the one who met Jesus first, that Andrew is the first disciple, and he met Jesus through the baptizer, and he brought Simon to Jesus. And not, because many a time we think that Peter is the one who met Jesus first, but John's gospel tells us that Andrew was the one who met Jesus first through John the Baptist, and then he brought Peter to Jesus. And when Jesus met Simon, Jesus automatically, immediately said to him, he says, "You shall be called Cephas." John chapter 1 and verse 42, which, as I said earlier, is the Aramaic word name for meaning rock. Now, the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, they tell of Jesus encountering Peter by the Sea of Galilee, and Peter and Andrew were casting their nets into the sea. They were together, and Jesus simply told them, "Follow me, I will make you fishers of men," or fishers of people. And the power of Jesus' words were so striking that they immediately left their nets and followed Jesus. And then we find in Luke's gospel, the way how Peter was called was that Jesus was teaching by the lake alongside the boats, where the men were washing nets after a night of failing to catch fish. And Jesus steps into Peter's boat. He tells him, "Go out a little bit from the shore." And there he sat and he taught. And when he was finished teaching, he said to Peter and those who were with him to go into the deep water and let down their nets. And, Peter at first protested, "We've toiled all night and we've caught nothing." But then, he yielded. He says, "But at your word, I will let down the nets." And the nets were let down, and immediately, when they tried to pull up the nets, there was a real huge catch of fish, and instantly Peter perceived that he was not simply having good fortune in fishing, rather that he was in the presence of a very powerful man, and so much so that his immediate response was that he was unworthy. And he knelt down at Jesus' feet and he says, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." So you see, Luke's gospel of calling Peter was more dramatic than the other two gospels, and the other three gospels. And you find that Jesus would not depart from him, that it was such a person as Peter was that Jesus wanted, a man who knew his weaknesses, a man who knew his sinfulness, but who could still acknowledge the presence of God in around him. And so Jesus tells him, do not be afraid. Henceforth you will be catching people. And he left everything to follow Jesus. You could tell from the very beginning that Peter was very much a prominent personality among Jesus' disciples, or a dominant personality, and he developed a close relationship with Jesus. He was one of the 12, but he was first among them. Whenever you hear the disciples are referred to, Peter's name always comes first. He was one of the inner three, Peter, James, and John, which we spoke about last week, and his name is always called first. He, as I said too, he always acted as their spokesman. Most of the time he used to act impulsively, not fully understanding what he was saying. Many of the times he didn't understand what he was saying, but he just said it. Sounded good, and Peter said it. And as I also mentioned, that Jesus went to Peter's home, especially when he healed his mother-in-law from a fever. That's when he first went to his home. The thing too that the gospel demonstrate about Peter is that Peter is a person who has unwavering faith. He's also a person who has great faith. He has great faith, unwavering faith, and then he's another time he's a person who his faith is greatly shaken. So he has great faith, but sometimes it's unwavering. Another time it is wavering. For example, where his faith wavered was when the story of Jesus walking through the darkness on the waters of the Sea of Galilee, toward the disciples, and they were rowing their boat and the wind was against them, and the disciples spotted Jesus coming on the water, walking on the water, and Peter wanted to do it too. And, the Lord told him, come. And he started walking, and he was walking until a whoosh of wind came, and the faith left, and he started to sink. And he cried out, Lord, save me. And the Lord saved him, lifted him up, and he said, oh, man of little faith, why did you doubt? You were doing well. And then a little bit of water, some wind come, and you lost your faith, and tumbling down you went. So you have him there with some wavering faith. And then when his faith was unwavering, Jesus asked him, who do people say that I am? And some say John the Baptist, some says Elijah, some say one of the other prophets. And then he asked them, but who do you say that I am? And Peter come right out immediately and said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. As it recorded in Mark's gospel. And here again, and Jesus will respond to him favorably, saying, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. So you see that there. So Jesus, he was very much, he knew his faith, he knew this was the Christ, and he was applauded for it. Mind you, though, it was in a quick turnaround. He also, when Jesus told him he was about to die, he says, no, that God forbid, that will never happen to you. And God told him, get behind me, Satan, because again, quickly his faith went again. He had this wavering faith again, because Jesus saying, you're trying to get me to be on the human side, not on the divine side. And what I'm about is about the divine, about the will of God, the Father. And so he got rebuked there again. Now,
Father, I have to get going. So
all right,
I really
Bryce.
like the thing, and I'm hoping to see you guys all in the fall.
We see you in the fall. Enjoy your summer, Bryce. God bless,
I
my
will.
brother. All right. Good to see you, Bryce. Bye-bye, my friend. So you see that, and it can also be seen as one of the weaknesses too of Peter. You will see that Peter was as I said last week, was part of the inner circle. He was there on the Mount of the Transfiguration with James and John when they saw Moses and Elijah. And it was a matter of Jesus taking these three disciples at times of special revelation. When there were special things to be revealed, Peter, James, and John went, and they saw Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration with Moses and Elijah there. Peter again was there on the night before his crucifixion, after the supper, the Last Supper in the Garden of Gethsemane, and where Jesus went to pray. He left the other disciples behind, took these three with him, went to pray, and when he came back, he found them asleep. And to show you how prominent Peter is, although all three was sleeping, he didn't say, well, Peter, James, and John, why are you sleeping? He said, he called Simon by name. Why are you sleeping? Because, now, another weakness you can say of Peter is the whole notion of at the Last Supper, when Jesus wanted to wash the disciples' feet, and it tells you also about Peter's impulsiveness. Jesus wanted to wash the disciples' feet, and Peter says, "Oh no, Lord, you should not wash my feet," because he revered Jesus. He was his master. He was, he was his leader, and he didn't want his leader washing his disciples' feet, washing their feet and his feet. So he says, "No, Lord, you're not going to wash my feet." And then Jesus says, "Well, if you don't let me wash your feet, you have no place with me." And Peter wants to have a place with Jesus. And he says to him, "Well, if you have to wash my feet, then wash all of me." Not only my feet, but wash every place of me, So that is the kind of guy Peter is. That's the kind of guy Peter is. You want him to wash his head, from his head right down to his feet. The other part of again, Peter, if you could call it strength and weakness, has to do with his denial. Jesus, when Jesus told him that he was going to suffer, Peter was adamant, "I'm not going to fall away, Lord. I'm not going to do that with you. I love you too much to do that to you." And Jesus said to him, well, strange enough, in 3 of the 4 Gospels, in Matthew, Luke, and John, it tells you Jesus says to him, "Before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times." Mark's Gospel is the one that is different. If you go and you read that story, Mark's Gospel is the only one that says, "Before the cock crow twice, you will deny me 3 times." The other 3 Gospels says, "Before the cock crows," meaning before the cock crows once, you will deny me 3 times. And so you and Peter, no. Even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you. That's easier said than done. That's easier said than done. When it's actually happening, ding, 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 ding. Something else went off in Peter's brain when the women and the man started accusing him of being with Jesus when Jesus was going through the trial. Peter denied him 3 times, and the cock crowed, and he remembered what Jesus said. And obviously, you could imagine how he would have taken that he had just done the very thing he said he would not have done. And you know, and I always say, you know, no one will know the turmoil that Peter was in, because I mean, here is it, you have been with a man for 3 years, he's your leader, you have been with him every day, working, teaching, seeing him perform miracles, see him healing the sick and all sorts of stuff. And knowing what you expected of the Messiah, you don't expect this guy to die. And so you find that after the supper, things get really tense. And you could almost feel that Peter was in turmoil, so much so that when they came to arrest him, he cut off the high priest slave's ear. You know, as a result, the slave Malchus ear with a sword. And then, you know, the whole notion of them taking Jesus away, and he getting the courage to follow the party who arrested him. We are not sure if all the disciples did that, but we know Peter was there in the courtyard of the high priest Caiaphas, where Jesus was being detained when he actually denied him. And you can also tell that when, you know, he was with these, when things were when Jesus was being interrogated and being condemned and all of this, you could tell that Peter you could feel it in Peter that the only thing he could do was deny, because obviously when the crutch came, he didn't want to end up like Jesus, you know. It's all right to say, oh, yes, Jesus, I'm going to die with you. But when the time comes, do I really want to do that? And here Peter again exemplifies a human trait. And you'll find that Peter again was the first of the disciples to run to the tomb to see for himself when Mary Magdalene and the other women announced Jesus' resurrection. And then when Peter, he and another disciple went, when the other disciple got to the tomb, he did not go in, but Peter went right in. Boom! Let me see what's going on here, and because that's who he is. And when he entered and the tomb, he saw that the burial wrappings were there. He believed that Jesus had risen. We are also told that Peter was the first of the 12 that Jesus appeared to. The Gospels do not describe the appearance. All Luke merely tells us is in Luke chapter 24 and verse 35 that the Lord is risen indeed and has appeared to Simon. And obviously he was going ahead to appear to the others as well. So it is apparent that out of the disciples, he appeared to Peter, the first out of the disciples. Obviously, this was after he appeared to Mary Magdalene. And Peter was also present at a number of the resurrection appearances that follow. Again, they were out fishing, couldn't catch no fish, and Jesus was on the shore. And he tells them, put out into the deep on the right side of the boat, the net. And they were skeptical at first, but Peter did what was instructed. And again, they caught a great fish. And it was one of the disciples that cried out, that realized it is the Lord. And Peter needed no further instruction. He just left them, and he wrapped himself in his outer garment, because sometimes these fellas used to be more or less virtually naked when they were out there fishing. And he wrapped himself in an outer garment, jumped and swam to greet his master. And there you find Jesus. Jesus is on the shore. He invites them to breakfast of fish and bread that he was cooking on an open fire. And then privately, but then during this private meal, Jesus would ask Peter 3 times if he loved him. What should I say? Those 3 times of asking Peter if he loves him was to coincide with the 3 denials that Peter made just before the crucifixion. And Peter's, he says to Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter answers, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Jesus told him, feed my sheep, tend my lambs, feed my lambs, and so forth. And that was the beginning of Peter's position as the founder of the Christian church. Now, as I mentioned earlier, at the Passover, at the Pentecost, Peter preaching, there were 3,000 people that were brought to Christianity. And you will read, in the months, there was much excitement and struggle in the book. We did the Acts of the Apostles. You would remember that Peter and John healed a lame beggar in the temple court. Remember, Jesus said to these folks, you're going to do more works than I did. And so they too were doing these good works. And Peter and John would be seized and placed in jail for preaching about Jesus. They would be released. There was a time where they were being persecuted. They even wanted to know how these uneducated common men could cause so much stir in the community. And Peter and the other disciples were repeatedly persecuted and arrested and threatened by the Jewish leaders because they were filled with jealousy. They were jealous, and the men still will not refuse to stop doing their work. And Peter was the one who would assert in the Acts of the Apostles, we must obey God rather than humankind. And it was even the Pharisee Gamaliel who when they wanted to kill Peter and the others, Gamaliel was the one who reasoned with the rulers, telling them, listen, folks, if these people, what they're doing is not of the work of God, it can fail. But how would you feel you go about you kill these people and their work is of the work of God, then you will be found opposing God. And he used that rationale to stop them from being killed. Then I mentioned about the magician, Simon the magician. Peter also would have encountered him. And the magician he had deluded a lot of Samaritans, but now he was a believer, and he wanted to pay them so he can get this power. And we spoke about that just now. Simon Peter also would have met him. The other part of Simon is that after Simon Peter is that after now the church has been formed, you will find that it comes down to the whole notion of the Gentiles. Peter, we use these words conservative and liberals these days very loosely, but they existed before time. Back then, we didn't realize that's what they were. But you had Peter and James of Jerusalem, who we would not have called them conservatives then. We call them traditionalists, and they were the ones who were who felt that the Gentile Christians should have be undergoing circumcision and following some of the Jewish rules. So as to become Christians, because remember, as I've said over and now, is that the Christianity was formed out of Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians. One were considered the people of God, the other one were considered pagans. And so one had all their rules and their regulations and customs and all of that. The other one had probably not much to think. They had their pagan gods and all of that. And they brought who they were into what we have as the Christian church. And so those like Peter and James, the leader of the Jerusalem church, felt that these Gentiles should at least be able to get circumcised and don't eat meat and all this sort of, eat pork and all this sort of stuff too, like what they were doing. Now, Paul, on the other side, he was the contemporary guy. He was the liberal guy. He was the guy who said, no. They should not have to come from being Gentiles to become Jews, then to come back to being Christians. That's not fair. And obviously they had a council, and at the end of the day, they decided that the two things that the Gentiles needed to do was that they were not to practice sexual, oh gosh, what was it? I keep forgetting the way how it's, give me a second.
Immorality.
Immorality. Yes, they were not to be, but there is a word. How did they term it? Hold on a second. But you are right. Hold 1 second. And I had it. They were not to practice. Where is it? Oh my golly. Oh my gosh, I can't find it. Yes, they were not to practice pagan sexual rituals. That's how they call it. They were not supposed to practice pagan sexual rituals. And obviously the other one, that was not supposed to offer meat that was sacrificed to idols. Those were the two things that the church agreed upon, that the Gentiles should not do. But in terms of circumcision and eating all that they wanted to eat and all of that, they were allowed to do that. Let's see here. We spoke about already what Peter encountered on Simon the Tanner's roof, the vision, which also gave, which we believe would have helped him in arriving at the decision he arrived at. So Peter became now from being a conservative to being a moderate. In today's terms, what's that, fan?
He's a centrist.
He's a centrist. He's a centrist. He's a centrist. You know, he moves down to the center because he realized God is telling him, listen, man, everybody belong to me. You know, I ain't got no favorites. You know, don't call anybody unclean, and so forth and so forth. So he moved to a centrist position. He was the one who would go to the home of Cornelius, a Gentile soldier in Caesarea, and he would convert him. And Cornelius and his household were converted to Christianity. Let me see what else I want to touch on with him. If you remember, the first part of Acts deals specifically with Peter. The last part of Acts deals with Paul, and Peter's example, you know, set an example in Jerusalem, and also in guiding the Gentiles. But obviously Paul did the work. I'm trying to think what else I want to say about him. Paul used to call Peter, actually, he did used to really call him Peter. He used to call him Cephas. That was a name that he had. They had, the other thing about Peter I want to mention is that, you know, he was arrested. He was the one that was arrested and imprisoned, and he escaped because of an angel sent by God, and he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John Mark, who had people at her house praying for Peter, and they were surprised. Well, when the servant girl came and said, Peter is outside the door. So you have that of him. He was also the two books that we have, the two letters that we have in the New Testament, First Peter, Second Peter, which is the first letter of Peter, is believed to have been written near the end of his career when he had gone to Rome, and which he kind of called Babylon. And the letter encourages Christians to understand the sufferings of Jesus's sufferings and to persevere in the faith and in the face of suffering and persecution. That's what the first letter is about, because the churches at that time were facing a great ordeal of persecution, a great deal of persecution. However, the second letter of Peter is sometimes well, it speaks about the warnings and concern regarding the dangers of false teachers and division within the church. And it is quite possible that this was written pretty soon after the first letter was written, although there are some scholars who may dispute whether or not Peter actually wrote this particular letter, or if it was written by one of his followers and given his name just for the authority of it. But it's quite pretty sure that he wrote the first one, but the jury is still out on whether he wrote the second one, but it is attributed to him.
Tony, I couldn't find the letters to Paul. Are they, or Peter?
Of Peter, the letters of Peter, yeah, they're near down to the end. They're near down to the the letters of Peter.
In my Bible, are they?
Yeah, in the New Testament. They're in the New Testament.
They may be called epistles.
They may be called epistles, but the letter, they come after the book of the letter of James. First and Second Peter come before the letter of James and before the letters of John. The letters of John. They're very close to the end. So you come down and you see Hebrews and James and First Peter, Second Peter, First John, Second John, Third John, and then after John is Revelation.
Revelation. Okay.
Right, and then after John is Revelation. So Peter is just before the letters of John.
Okay, I have Peter 2. Is that it?
Peter, you see the First Peter, Second Peter?
Right. And then John 1 and John 2.
Right. Well, not John 1 and John 2. It would be First John, Second John. It would be 1 John, 2 John, 3 John. And then after comes, I think, Jude. And then after Jude is Revelation. So First Peter, Second Peter are the two books, the two epistles or the two letters that Peter is said to have wrote. The first one, yes. The second one, it's attributed to him at least. He may have written it, but it could have been a follower.
Okay.
So
1 Peter and 2 Peter. Okay.
Yes.
Alrighty.
Yeah, those are Peter's letters.
Thanks.
You're welcome, my dear. You're welcome. And then there's no record of when Peter died. In the Bible, it is believed that he suffered martyrdom at the hands of the Roman Emperor Nero, which would have been sometime around AD 64. And it is also believed that he was martyred upside down because he said he did not want to be martyred in the same position as our Lord. Out of respect for our Lord, he did not, where Jesus was vertical, the right way up on the cross, he wanted to be head down when he was martyred. And so it is believed that is how he was martyred. Apart from that, he is revered as the first Pope of Rome, the first Bishop of Rome. And where all and you will realize that in Rome, in the Vatican, the basilica there is called St. Peter's Basilica, which is dedicated to St. Peter as the first bishop of Rome. I think that's pretty much it for Peter.
So
Yes,
did they
Linda.
was Peter martyred by whom?
Oh, he would have been martyred
Nero,
joined
right?
by Nero, the Roman Emperor Nero. So he would have been martyred by the Romans.
Isn't that kind of ironic that,
What?
he went on to be such a powerful leader in the Roman Catholic Church? I mean, powerful symbol, not leader, but symbol, and all his participation in what he did to get the church going.
Yes, yes.
Just
But you see, the thing is about it is you got to remember that persecution in those days was rampant. This movement, I mean, as we did the Acts of the Apostles, and all you were hearing is, and people were adding to this number, and this church was growing and growing and growing. This movement was really growing, and there were the Jews on the one end who wanted to stamp it out. There were the Romans on the other end that wanted to stamp it out as well. But these men would not relent. These men just kept on, and they didn't care what they faced.
That's another thing. There's so many. You think about today's world. How many people would have stepped up like they did, and
But I would tell you this, Linda. I'll tell you that. Yeah, but I'll tell you this. It's still happening. People are still doing it today. It may not be happening in the United States because we have not come to that level of persecution, but there are other parts of the world where there's that level of persecution. The other day, I think I was reading something where they killed some people who refused to join the Muslim faith. They were Christians. They refused to join the Muslim faith. And because they refused to do it, they were killed. So it is still happening in the world today. We don't experience it. We don't feel it as much. We only hear about it if we do hear about it. But there's still people who are dying for the Christian faith who would not relent. So yeah, yeah, but there are people, obviously, I agree too. There are some people, there's a joke that I think, I can't remember how it all goes, but I remember there was a joke I gave years ago for a sermon where these three gunmen came into a church and tell everybody if they don't believe in Jesus, how did they put it? If they don't want to get killed, they need to get out of the church now if they believe in Jesus. And a whole set of people laughed, but there were a few people who remain, and they threatened them again, and they stick there, and they threatened them a third time, and they remained, and then the three men then said to the pastor of the church, "These are your real Christians," and they laughed.
It's scary.
So these are your real Christians, and they laugh. But yes, there are still people today who they're persecuted, and they accept the persecution, and they die for Christ.
It's very powerful.
It is very powerful.
Think about
it is very powerful.
What happened, and what is happening now.
It is very powerful. They believe in Jesus and what he stood for and what he did, and they carried it on. So yeah. Any questions?
What are your summer plans?
What are my summer plans? My summer plans is that, well, right now, next week, I'm off to Louisville, Kentucky.
Oh, yes.
To General Convention.
You get to see Bishop Curry.
Yes. His last time as presiding, he winds down being presiding bishop, his term of office ends on October 31st. The new presiding bishop starts from November 1st.
And who is that?
We don't know
Who's-
yet. We'll know week after next.
Oh, so when are the recordings going to be sent? So I missed a few class.
Okay, you have all of them, right, Pam? On mute, Pam, on mute. What I'm gonna, if Pam, I believe Pam has them, right, Pam?
I have them. I'll probably do it while we're in.
Well,
while
yeah,
we're in,
when we're in Kentucky. What will
Kentucky.
happen is, this is what I'm going to do for you all. I'll have Pam, because I want to send you all some handouts that was in that book, the notes from the study Bible, and I have not sent them to you all. And after I realized I was not sending them to you all, I decided not to send them at all, but to send all of them at the end. So
Oh,
you will
okay.
have an email that will have all the handouts, and we'll have all the links to the different classes. So I will send them all in one. And what I'll do is when the links come, I will label which link is which was the text the subject we were dealing with. Or if Pam might do that while she's doing it, so it makes it easier for me. But you will have the names of, like this was the Simons of the Bible or the Josephs of the Bible, or we were talking about whoever.
But it'll be on the
It'll be on YouTube.
It will be, they will be all on YouTube.
oh, great. I
Yes,
can
there will be all. Yes, there will be all from. It will be all YouTube. So look for. Don't look for it next week.
No.
Don't look for it next week.
But end of the month. By the end of the month.
I will say by the end of the month or the beginning of next month.
Okay.
Yes. So yes, to answer your question, Linda. So that's what I'm doing for a week, and I'm also going to a 100th anniversary of birth. This lady who comes to our, yes, her daughter and son-in-law and grandchildren and great-grandchildren are members of our congregation, and they're also children in Texas as well. And she will be 100 on the 29th of this month. So I'm going to that as well.
100, wow.
And because she comes up to this year in March, she was here. She travels still at 99. She traveled up here, and I think she travels twice a year.
Yeah.
So she
Usually.
travels twice a year, and she does not miss church. She does not miss an event that is going on at the church. She is at every, as we will say, she's at every cockfight. And you say that in Barbados. And so I was thinking that I should go, and they have sent me an invitation to come and all that good stuff. And so I would love to go, and so I'm going to that, and I'm leaving straight from General Convention and going straight to that. and then I will come back, and then I'll probably take a break I'm planning on taking a break in August. So
Sounds good. You need
to do Bible study for a few weeks.
Say that again.
I said you won't have Bible study to prepare.
Yes, I'll tell you, it does take some time. It does take some time.
Yeah.
And there's a lot that goes into it. And so when the summer comes, it's a breather for me to just
we read.
Yeah, and it's a breather for everybody, it's a breather for everybody. But it does take a lot of time. It does take a lot of time.
Yes, yeah.
Well, we enjoy it.
Well, that is good. I'm
Well,
glad
we
it's
look forward to
meaningful. I'm glad it's
next
meaningful
year.
for everyone. I'm glad.
You want suggestions for next time, or you got it planned? Okay.
I'll let you all know. If you've got any suggestions, text them to me or email them to me. I have an idea, but I'm not sold yet on it, so we'll see. We'll see.
Okay.
All right, everyone. Have a good night.
Okay.
Have a
All
good
right,
dinner.
have a good
Love to
summer.
all of you. Marilyn, take care of yours. Marilyn, Cyrus, you take care of yourself, okay? And
All right.
also Susan, Linda, you all take care of yourselves, all right? We
Yeah.
look forward to seeing you in the fall again, okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
God bless.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. And thank you,
Bye.
Pam, for always
Bye.
hosting us. And you and
Yeah.
Marilyn from time to
Yes.
time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And
Bye-bye.
Bye.